Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Thesewrena, and in today's video we're going to be making either the last outfit of 2022 or the first outfit of 2023. I am not sure yet, so in any case, Happy New Year. I am so happy for you guys to be spending this first couple hours or days or moments of the new year with me on my video. So yeah, today we're going to be making a dress, and then out of the blue I decided to make a second project in this video for my husband. So we were gonna have some matching outfits. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at SewRena_ if you'd like to follow me in real time. You can also support this channel further by leaving me a virtual tip on Ko-fi. The information for that will be in the description box below. Now let's get into the patterns. Okay, so the first pattern that we're going to be working with is going to be a Gertie pattern. Not using the pattern in its entirety. In fact, I really wanted to focus on having a lot of fun for this pattern. But in order to kind of like cleanse my palette and not have to sit here and worry about a time constraint or anything like that, I just kind of do what I feel. So I wanted to do a little bit of draping on my professional dress form because I just got it this year, 2022, and I've never like used it for anything technical apart from like use it for fitting as well. So I wanted to do a little bit of freestyling, so I used Gertie's Lamour bodice as a base for that, and then I started kind of like freestyling and draping my pattern from there. So the skirt I drafted myself. It's a simple gathered skirt. Second, we're going to be making a simplicity costume pattern, and I will put the photo of it up here somewhere. And so I basically made sure that my skirt left enough fabric to make my husband a matching jacket because I fell in love with the fabric so much that I wanted to make sure that I got an opportunity to use it for two garments, especially since I'm kind of frugal. So I spent quite a bit on this fabric, and I thought it would be nice to get more than one piece out of it. So I made him a jacket, and the reason I chose this pattern specifically was because I had already cut it out maybe a year or two prior, but never used it before. So I felt like this would be a great opportunity to knock out a project not relatively quickly, but essentially the pattern was already prepped. So I thought it would be a great place to start with something that was already cut out that I hadn't used yet. Once I got into the pattern itself, I realized that the pattern is a costume pattern, and while I guess the pattern art would have shown me that if I would have paid attention, but in my head, you can pretty much do whatever you want with a pattern. Like you can make a wedding dress in quilting cotton if you wanted to. So I just assumed that it was a suit pattern made with like really fun novelty prints, because I kind of do stuff like that all the time. Upon further inspection, especially when I was going in to see what the lining requirements were, I realized that it is unlined, but there is no option to line it unless of course you do make the lining yourself. I thought that was kind of odd, and then I paid attention to the description, and it turns out that this pattern is actually a costume pattern, so it's not intended for serious wear. It is going to be unlined because I don't have any lining material. I'm going into this with no interfacing because I just used up all of my interfacing over Christmas. No lining material because the pattern didn't call for it, plus I don't have it even if I wanted to. I used scrap buttons that I found in my sewing room. Like I literally had to dig through a jar and a giant bag of vintage buttons to find buttons that would work. Now it's time to show you the fabric. For the fabric, I'll be using velvet with a metallic printed rose motif and some solid black velvet as well. So to start off, I am using the Lamour dress pattern bodice to cut out my bodice. I'm starting off with the rose motif because I want it to peekaboo on the bust of my dress. I am only using the printed velvet for the center front and the side front of this pattern, and then for the side back and the center back, I'll be using a plain black velvet. It was scrap fabric in my stash. I wanted to use the least amount of the printed velvet for my bodice so that way I'd have more than enough for the skirt, and this was before I even knew I wanted to make the coat. Now it's time to start assembling the bodice. I'm using a simple straight stitch, and you want to clip around the curve just a little so that way it lays smoothly and it's easy to ease the bodice in on the sides where it is curved around the side front. Then I am adding some stay stitching to the top and the bottom of the bodice so that way it does not stretch out as I pin and play with the bodice on the dress form later. So this is the first time I've ever doing anything like this. I was just playing around with this black velvet on the dress form, and I thought it would make a cute dress, and so I kind of built this entire dress around playing around with this dress form. So all I did was do some draping with the velvet, and then I pinned all of the little pleats in place, and then I cut the excess off so that way eventually I can move the velvet from off of the dress form to under the sewing machine. Before I could remove the velvet from the dress form, I decided to baste the pleats in by hand so there's less chances of them moving out of place. Once all the pleats are basted on, it's time to attach the black velvet to the center front of the bodice, and I'm attaching it on the side seams, and after that I'm going to trim off all the extra solid velvet before moving on to the next step, which would be attaching the side back and the center back in a solid velvet. Now it's time to work with the lining. I am using some poly cotton that I found in my scrap bin as usual, and I am interlining with some cotton muslin. After that, I'm going to sew in some boning. I used this type of boning in my very last video. You get to sew directly through the boning, so you don't have to sew in boning channels, which saves some time. After this, I attach the lining to the bodice, and then I make sure to understitch the upper part of the sweetheart so that way the lining doesn't show in the front. I attach the bodice to a very simple gathered skirt, so just giant rectangles, and then I hand basted or hand tacked the pleats underneath each of the folds so that way they hold in place. I attached a simple zipper, and that dress is complete. And now it's time to move on to the next project. So as an unplanned project, I definitely had no supplies for this, and near the end of the year I usually don't have a whole lot of supplies because I used up what I need, and then I don't go shopping again until the new year. I don't like shopping online because I don't want my packages lost in the mail around the holidays, and I don't really enjoy going in person because I feel like retail workers have enough on their plate than to deal with last minute shoppers. So this coat will be made with everything but the kitchen sink, starting with interlining with some denim, and then I move on to doing some bound buttonholes using denim as interfacing because of course I ran out of interfacing and any other substitute that I could use for interfacing. Now I'm attaching the back to the side. The velvet lacks structure, so I felt like the denim would be a good compromise to give it that structure that it needs, and I went with black because this is an unlined jacket and I didn't want to use my muslin, which would have shown really easily when you opened up the jacket. Because this was such a last minute project, I consider this to be a wearable muslin. I did a tissue fitting with the pattern pieces, but that will never equate to actually making a muslin. This was the Thursday before the new year, so at this point I felt like if I did complete it in time, we would have cute matching outfits for New Year's Eve. So I just went with it. Also, I really enjoy wearable muslins, so I usually do go at my muslins with the intent of being able to wear it out afterwards. So I put in all of the effort when it comes to construction. That's why I went with bound buttonholes instead of worked buttonholes. And I take great care to make sure that any kind of hemming that I do doesn't show through to the front and is attached to the interlining layer. Also, if you put that much effort into your muslin, then you can consider it practice for your final project, especially if you need the practice. Next up on, I don't have that material for this step of the project. I am using some crinoline to interface the collar. I am using the solid velvet for the collar and the lapel pieces of his jacket, so that way it matches with the bodice of my dress. Also, at this point, I have nothing but shreds of the printed velvet left, so there was no more to make a matching lapel and collar anyway. Because velvet is relatively slippery, I hand basted with some really wide stitches the crinoline to the collar. I do not recommend using crinoline for a collar unless of course you're doing a wearable muslin like I am, or that's all you have, because it is very rigid, so the collar doesn't roll when you flip it over. It kind of bends. And while I think it'll work well for this project because it is black and the pill on the velvet kind of hides the angles, I just wouldn't recommend this unless you absolutely had to. Before attaching the collar to the jacket, make sure to cut the seam allowance of the crinoline so that way the collar stretches properly around the neckline of the jacket. I also recommend that you hand baste the collar onto the jacket before you start to sew it. Of course, I'm not following my own advice because at this point I am trying to get this done before New Year's Eve, so I am using pins, but I should have listened to my own advice because then I had to go back and unpick sections of the collar because I did end up missing the under bit of fabric. So do it right the first time and then you won't have to waste time doing it again. Now it's time for the sleeves. So the sleeves is put together in two separate pieces, and I didn't mention here, but you're going to want to use a pressing cloth and a sleeve ham to make sure that you get all of your seams pressed nice and neatly. And then also I used steam. Be very careful with the steam because you don't want to ruin the velvet. And I used a clapper, thanks to one of my wonderful viewers, to trap the steam in and get a very nice seam. Now, because the denim is quite thick, I could not just use thread alone to ease the sleeves, so I had to zigzag over some yarn in order to draw the sleeve up enough to fit it into the armholes. This is a step you might be able to avoid depending on the fabric that you have, and you can just use some regular thread to ease that sleeve in. I also want to make note that it is very important that you mark the sleeves exactly the way that the pattern says to, so that way you ease your sleeve in perfectly into the jacket, because you don't want weird lines. If the sleeve does not match up properly with the jacket, it'll look funny. Now, because this jacket is unlined, it utilizes facings to cover all of the raw edges. So this is the back facing, and I am attaching a leather SewRena tag to it because even though this is a wearable muslin, I am very proud of this jacket considering it is my first men's tailored jacket. I have been making suits for myself for maybe a couple years in preparation for making some men's suits, so it's really fun to finally be able to work on a piece for my husband. Throughout the years, I've learned so much on my own suits. I started working with hair canvas. I started learning how to pad stitch. I learned how to make custom shoulder pads with pad stitching to help shape them. I learned a lot about suiting materials, wools, structure, and I think all of that information is perfect for elevating this costume jacket into something wearable and elegant, even if I can't show off the insides until I make a lining. So I ran out of the black denim, so I used some red denim that I had to interline the lapel or interface the lapel. And I have to hem the lapel and then baste it to the jacket, so you won't be able to see this once it's inside of my jacket. So even though this was never meant to be a serious pattern, I'm quite impressed with this pattern in general. He's done several fittings in between each of the steps, And I will say that the fit is kind of okay. I do have to make some changes later on, but that is to be expected. You usually do have to make adjustments and alterations to patterns, especially suits that you want to be perfectly tailored to the wearer. The only adjustments that I made to this pattern was to leave off the patch pockets that were on it. So this suit jacket does not have any pockets at all because one, I didn't have enough fabric for the pockets, but two, I felt like the patch pockets really took away from the look of the jacket, especially since I was trying to elevate an otherwise costumey pattern. I also left off the buttons on the wrist of the jacket because they were just for vanity and I thought they would have gotten lost in the print. Currently, I am sewing the tiniest whip stitches to attach the facing to the interlining of the jacket. I am taking great care to make sure that these stitches do not make it onto the other side of the fabric so they can't be seen. The whip stitches are really small, but also they're hidden in the pill of the velvet, so that's really nice as well. I recommend doing this inside out on a dress form, taking great care to smooth out the outer fabric as you sew. The body is not straight, so if you do this on a straight flat surface on with the jacket right side out, you might get unwanted wrinkles and buckles on the other side. So I just found this to be the easiest way to get a very smooth application of the facing when you're sewing it directly to the jacket. Use lots of pins to assist with this process to make sure that the facing isn't moving as you are sewing. After this step, I sew on my vintage pearl buttons and I make my own shank with thread. I'll pop in a photo of what that looks like. I cut and sew my bound buttonholes open and then the jacket is finally complete. I bet you're wondering if I got this done in time for New Year's Eve, and technically I did. However, this guy right here did not have black trousers or a black dress shirt, so we did not get to wear our outfits in time. He still needs a tie, but all in all, I'm very proud of my work. He really enjoys his new jacket, and this will be the perfect ensemble for Valentine's Day instead. Now that the jacket is done, did I successfully elevate this costume pattern? Let me know in the comments below. Mr. SewRena was kind enough to get dressed really early in the morning so I could get footage so we don't have any together. I want to take advantage of the daylight because it is raining. But here is my dress completed. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And if you liked it, please like and subscribe as well as follow for more videos like this. If you would like to support me further, you can leave me a virtual tip on Ko-Fi. The link will be in the description and I'll see you next time.